Alrighty. So I should have both the grade 9s and grade 10s on this one. So I feel like most of you should have um known or heard of this, but with COVID and the lockdown last year, it might have been something that you were not able to learn about or just flat out don't remember. Um, so we're going to look at Pythagorean theorem, and this is super important for the rest of the octomester. So make sure that you fully understand what you're doing, and if you have any questions to ask me or Mr. Found by any means. So to start, we have a few words here. So hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is the longest side of a right angle triangle. And this only works with right angle triangles. Don't try doing it on any other ones. Um, so for those of you who don't know what a right angle triangle is, which I hope most of you do, it's something that has, or it's a triangle that has a 90-degree angle in one of its corners. So the hypotenuse is always going to be on the other end of that. Okay, so it's always going to be on the opposite end of your 90-degree angle. So this is important to remember and to know. So this is your hypotenuse. Okay, so it's always across from your 90-degree angle. It's always your longest length of your triangle, okay, of your right angle triangle. So for our definition, it is the longest side of a right triangle, and it is opposite of the right angle. Okay, the other two parts of the triangle, so the other two lines are called legs, and that's what forms the 90-degree angle. Yeah, so this is a leg, and this is a leg. Okay, so if we look at this triangle here, our 90-degree angle is here. Okay, so that means that this is going to be our hypotenuse. So our hypotenuse is usually labeled a C, and the other two are A's and B's. Okay, like that. So like I said, the legs are the two other parts, the two other sides of your triangle that form together or come together to form that 90-degree angle. Okay. And the Pythagorean theorem, which took me a very long time to be able to say in English because English is not my first language. It is the theorem that the sum of the squares on the legs of a right triangle is equal to the square of the hypotenuse. So, in other words, and I hope you have seen this equation or heard it at least on TV or something, it is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Okay, so super important for you guys to remember. You're going to use it for a lot of things, not just this one lesson, but for a lot of other things. So like I was saying to the grade 10s yesterday, I couldn't do most of your surface area lesson because a lot of you didn't know the Pythagorean theorem. So I wanted to go over this with you guys before, and then we can go over the surface area stuff. So it kind of comes hand in hand with the other stuff that you guys are going to be learning. So I'm going to erase this and we're going to do some examples. And then there's plenty of practice questions for you. So just make sure that you understand. Okay. So for our first one, you're to find the length of the unknown side. Now I know it's hilarious. I've seen it online where like people circle it and like found it, you know. But you got to find what the number of x's. Okay. So first off, you want to find where your right angle triangle is so you can identify your hypotenuse. Okay. So your hypotenuse, like I said, is across from the 90-degree angle. So you've got, this is your C. Okay, so C is always going to be your hypotenuse. A and B doesn't matter which leg it's on, but C has to be your hypotenuse, no matter what. Okay, and we're going to label this guy A, and we're going to label this guy B. Okay, so our formula, you're going to say it while you sleep tonight. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay. Takes a lot of practice. So A, we don't know. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so A squared stays the same. Now B, we know is 8. So where you see B, you're going to replace it with 8. Okay. And then we know that C is 17. Okay, so just like we did with the volume, you want to get rid of these exponents first. So that's what you're going to do. Okay, so you're going to keep your A squared the exact same. You're going to do 8 squared. So 8 squared is equal to 64. Okay, and then you're going to do 17 squared. Okay, so that becomes 289. So when you're trying to find the length of an unknown side, what your goal is you want to get that letter on its own. So here we've got the 64 and we've got the squared that's kind of hanging off of the A. So we want to get rid of that. Okay, so what you do is you want to move the numbers over onto the other side. So what happens is when it's adding on this side, when we move it over to this side, you're going to subtract it. Oh man. Okay, so you're going to subtract 64 from both sides. So plus 64 minus 64, that cancels out, right? That just gives you 0. So that leaves us with nothing on that side. Okay. So that way we're left with A squared. Okay. So A squared, and then you're going to do this part. So 289 minus 64 is going to give you 225. Okay. So we got rid of that 64. All we did is we did the opposite. So it was adding. Now we're subtracting it on both sides. Now we've got our squared. So the opposite of a square is the square root. Okay. So if we square root both sides, okay, this cancels out our squared. Square rooting a square just cancels it out. That means that our A is all on its own, finally. Okay, so then the square root of 225, you would punch that into your calculator, and that's going to give you 15. Okay, so that means that we've got 14 or 15 feet. That means that this side over here is 15 feet. So just always remember, just a tip, this is always our longest. Okay, our hypotenuse is always the longest length. So that means that if this were to be, if that would have came out like 25, you're so wrong. Okay, so just double check just to make sure that it makes sense. As long as it's smaller than this guy, because this always has to be the longest, it makes sense. Okay, so we're going to try B again here. So you want to start off by finding your right angle triangle, or your right angle. Find your hypotenuse. So look at that. So our hypotenuse is our C. So that's what we have to find, which kind of makes our life a little bit easier. And then we can label these guys A and B. Again, it doesn't matter which one's which. Okay, so our formula is A squared plus B squared equals C squared. So we know that our A is 25, so we're going to put 25 right here. So 25 squared. Okay, we know that our b is 15, so we do 15 squared. And then we don't know our c, so the c is going to stay the same. Okay. So we know to do our exponents first, so do 25 squared first. Don't be adding. Okay, so 625, and then 15 squared is 225. Okay. Now our next step is to add those two together. So 625 plus 225 becomes 850. So 850 equals c squared. Okay, this isn't where it ends, right? We do want this letter all on its own. So when we have a squared like this and we want it on its own, that means that we're going to square root both sides of our equation. Okay, so this cancels each other out. The squared and the square root cancels each other out. And the square root of 850 is 29. Okay, so that means that our side length C for X is equal to 29 meters. Sorry, I forgot that. Okay, so meters. Okay, so I'm going to erase that, and we've got two more examples. We're not going to have a ton of room. So remember, our first step is to find the right angle, which leads us to the hypotenuse, which is here. So we can label that C, label the other guys A and B. Okay, so just remember our formula. Helps us out tremendously if you write the formula so that you know where things are going. So our A we know is 3.1. Okay, squared plus 4.8 squared equals, and we don't know C. Okay, so you're going to punch that into the calculator, and 3.1 is going to be equal to 9, or 3.1 squared is equal to 9.161, sorry. And 4.8 squared is equal to 23. Okay, and that's equal to c squared. So now if we add these guys up, it gives us 32.65. That gives us c squared. So again, we want our c on its own, so you're going to square root both sides, which gives us 5.7 centimeters. I have to hurry here. Okay, and that's our C length. Okay, and our very last example here. So you're going to start off by finding the right angle. This is our hypotenuse right here. We're going to label this A, label that B. You're going to do your formula. So A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, so we know that we don't know A. So A is going to stay like that. B is equal to 10. We're going to put 10 squared here. And C is 15. Okay, so our first job is to do the exponents. So 10 squared becomes 100. Okay. And 15 squared is 225. Okay. So our next step is that we want A all on its own. So what you're going to do is you're going to get rid of the addition over here. So by doing that, you want to do the opposite. So it's adding. So we're going to subtract the same amount on both sides. Okay, so you're going to do minus 100 on both sides. So you're going to do the opposite. So these guys cancel out. Plus 100 minus 100 cancels out. So then you're left with A squared. You're going to do the 225 minus 100, which gives us 125. Okay, and just like all the other ones, when you have squared, you want to square root both sides so that the A it's on its own. And it does have to be in that order. We'll find out a little bit more about that afterwards, but if you've learned about BEDMAS, so what you're doing is you're doing the opposite of BEDMAS with this. So it does have to be subtract and then square root, okay? And so that means that this side here is 11. So again, remember that these two sides have to be smaller than this guy. This guy has to be the largest number out of them all, okay? So I'm going to clear this. And I'm going to move down to show you your work. So you've got your independent work here. There are quite a few questions for you to do. Luckily, they're labeled for you. So that should help you out. Just don't forget what your formula is. And that is it. So grade 10s, you have another video to watch, grade 9s as well. And then that's it for the week. That's it.